welcome to another episode of the Future Tech podcast series. It's me, Charlie Sell, the Group MD of Arrows Group, where I get a chance to interview, have open conversations with tech leaders from across the globe, asking them a bit about their story, their thoughts and passions within being a tech leader within their industries, and that all-important career advice to many of our STEM listeners. So I'm really pleased to have Honza Siroky with me today. Honza is the CTO of Mews. Mews is a global technology hospitality platform, and it really is going places. So it's going to be really, really interesting to hear not only his journey, but also the world that he works in. So without further ado, Honza, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And let's jump straight in. Tell us a bit about your story.
Yeah, so, I started doing programming when I was like 16 years old. I started on the website, so like static websites, nothing too fancy, HTML, CSS. And then, I wanted to do something cooler with the websites, bring in some more life to them, some data storage. So yeah, I started learning JavaScript and then the backend technologies around websites so that, some database where the websites can store data. And from there on, I moved to basically web applications, which are, this stuff. And yeah, I was doing that in parallel with my studies, both like high school studies and then university studies. Yeah, during the university studies, I picked up a couple of like random side projects, either individually and one with one of my friends, where we worked together. I was the backend guy, he was the front end guy. And yeah, then basically Mews became another side project. So, my friend called me just, hey, Honza, I have another project. Do you want to join? I was like, yeah, why not? It was, I think, last year of my university. So I've jumped on that and I'm in Mews since then.
Amazing. So you're one of the founders then of Mews, along with your friend and starting the journey.
Yeah, I'm not a formally founder, but I could be, like a founding CTO or something like that. Richard Walter is the official founder who established the company. But yeah, now I'm basically employee number one out of those like 500 employees. So yeah, the friend of mine, he left after like two and a half years. So basically I inherited the number one spot because he started with Richard like a week before me. He had a talk with Richard and then, he called me like week afterwards. So officially he was the number one, but when he left, I inherited that position.
Yeah. And so what's it been like being part of a business that's gone from being number one employee to 500 employees now and the growth of that journey?
Yeah, the growth is pretty crazy. I tend to see the phases of my career based on the primary tools that I'm using, in my day-to-day life. So initially, I was just a programmer. So I was spending most of my time in the IDE, in Visual Studio, writing the code. That was my bread and butter. Then over time, when I started leading, a team of developers, I shifted more from writing the code to GitHub, which is our platform where we submit the code, open pull request, and review that. So at that stage, I was mostly using GitHub to do code reviews, but also I was having already some meetings with the team, solutioning and ideating. How are we going to build that? So I shift from the coding phase to the other sides of it, to the preparation of the coding and then doing some code reviews. So that was pretty long phase in Mews because it took us, several years to gain the traction. And then the phase I'm currently at is where Outlook is my, main tool that I'm using, going on to meetings, talking to people. Yeah, so the growth has been crazy. I started while I was still studying at the university, and it was just another project for me, not having any big ambitions or anything. And now it turned into, huge successful company with now I have like 125 people in my team. So, if I compare it now and 10 years ago, that's like extreme difference.
And I just couldn't agree with you more about how the involvement of leadership and management, whether you're in technology or sales or even finance, it's strange how the journey goes from being very hands-on to then being the chief reviewer. But ultimately, it ends up being the person who has to then run meetings and being, it's a very much becomes a people job, doesn't it? It's about how to motivate and develop and give careers to the people that work for you. And how have you found that? What have been your lessons when you've been looking at growing the team from 0 to 125 people? How have you been able to maintain the culture or the development of the people?
Yeah, for me, I think the key moment or milestone moment in my career was so I'm programmer at heart, problem solver at heart. Some kind of product management is something I like doing. So I'm not like a naturally born people person or people manager. But at some point I realized that I'm no longer building the applications for our customers or for the systems for the hotel guests and the people like those. And at one point I realized I'm building the teams and the organization that is building those applications. And that was for me the main shift where I realized, my customers are all the employees. My product is the engineering organization. That's what I'm building. So in a sense, I still feel that I'm like a developer and product manager, but I'm no longer, developing and product managing the hotel product that we have. I'm developing and product managing the organization. And of course, for example, part of that is like to have good career framework and compensation framework, because, as a good product manager, you listen to what your customers, AKA my employees want, what are their problems, what are they struggling with. You listen to that and you want to solve that in some way. So yeah, that's, for example, how I got into the career framework, progression systems and things like this, where I build that so that my people know what should they do, which skills should they acquire to get better, to go to a different path, etc. But that's one of the examples. There are other things like how to work effectively, how to collaborate with product management, how to establish the teams, so that the teams are performing well. So basically, someone told me, like mentor, or we had a call, and he told me, you need to realize you're no longer building the machines. You're building the machine that builds the machines. So that's what I really took to heart, and I'm following now.
And what great life lessons. And what I really like about that, customers are your employees now. How you can still maintain that outward looking focus, but move that to your employees, the career development, the frameworks, as you mentioned. And I talk a lot about what I call the employee value proposition. If a business can get their employee value proposition correct and you can offer the careers, you offer the right structures, they are your business. They are an equal stakeholder in your business to your clients, your suppliers. It's built. And the fact that that's intrinsic to you is credit, I guess, because it's not often people are taught that, are they? You've got to be naturally in tune with how to put people at the heart of your business.
Yeah, for me, it's, I can no longer fix a bug or develop a feature for the customers, but I can kind of still impact that by channeling that through the employees. So in a sense, all the teams are like a channel for me through which I can still impact it. I can impact the company strategy, the direction, which sets the tone, sets the direction, but it's not like direct, it's indirect. It's similar to like platform teams, which we have in the organization that are building some frameworks and tools for the product teams that are building the products. So in a sense, it's similar because they're not directly, building a new feature, but they're building something that's used by others to solve the customer problems. So, yeah.
And how have you found, there's a question I ask many of my guests, that obviously through the pandemic, from overnight, we have had to move from probably being, and I'm not sure if it's similar for you, where we had all of our engineers within offices working collaboratively together, to suddenly having to pivot to being remote and hybrid working, and how you keep people engaged or keep people performing when you're suddenly having to reassess how their working conditions. Did that happen the same for you? Did Mews have to go through that same journey as well?
Yeah, we basically overnight went to fully remote environment. So I would say, for all the engineers and developers, it actually wasn't that bad. So I would bet that, half of them even enjoys it more without having to commute and go into the office, which we had, right before COVID hit. We had pretty crowded office. We are growing super fast, so it was loud there. So actually, I think many people, enjoyed this shift, and myself included, because nowadays I'm having a lot of calls, meetings. So in the office, I would have to be closing myself into some call booths or things like that. Whereas at home, I can have like full room with a fridge 2 meters away, which is great for me. So yeah, I think the people took it pretty well, especially in the R&D and engineering, because we operated in an online world even before that. It also allowed us to start hiring much more remotely in other locations, because the COVID and working online kind of leveled the playing field for everybody. While we had like majority of people in Prague, but big office in Netherlands, big office in UK, and if the developers were remote, it kind of majority of the team in Prague, it wasn't equal for them. This leveled the playing field, so we started hiring much more globally and distributed. For example, product managers are now distributed all across the world. These engineers, we're still a bit located in Prague, but we've already started hiring in Spain, UK, Netherlands, and in other countries. So actually pretty positive. On the other hand, it had the impact, on the culture and togetherness of the team, and sense of company. So yeah, we tried to do some even like online outings, or I don't know if it's even a proper word. We had some like escape game that was played online. We do some like we play some online games together, like GeoGuessr, which is like this game that we collect people together and they play online, and then there's some time where they can talk informally afterwards. So yeah, and the teams are organizing some meetings or some get-togethers as well. So it's not as frequent, but it's still happening.
Yeah, and then well done, because it's so refreshing. I totally agree with you that the remote working now has leveled the playing field, and it means now that we can look at talent across the globe essentially, and especially with similar timeframes, so Central Europe. Yeah. But to then also be aware enough that people are loyal to cultures as much as careers. So keeping people engaged through gamification or community chats. You've got to try and balance both, don't you? It's offering people great careers and freedom and flexibility, but then understanding and feeling part of the business and their why they want to work for that specific company, and keep
Sorry for jumping in on the gamification topic. So actually we have in the tech team, we call it engagement game, and it basically runs for 6 months, and there are various activities. Those are not like extracurricular activities that are not mandatory, that are not in the job description, but that are like nice to have, that we want people to do if they want to. It's not mandatory. So there are things like writing a blog post for our developer blog, going to meetup, speaking at meetup, mentoring someone, participating in some cross exposures in the company, basically all those extracurricular activities. And you get some points for that. So by the way, thanks for inviting me, because I will be getting some points for being present on your podcast. And basically then there are awards at the end, and we were like, developers have really good salaries. So, awarding them with money or like iPhone, that wouldn't be, too attractive. So we had to come up with something that money can't buy. And a couple of times what we did, we engaged with like a fashion designer, and we created like a collection of premium merch. So like a hoodie, sweatpants, socks, some like premium clothing that money can't buy. It's a limited collection. And basically the only way you can get it is to earn the engagement points by writing blogs or going to meetups and, spreading the word around Mews and showing how we do stuff. And we had people who are like, hey, I will give you, some money if you can get me this cool hoodie. And I was sorry, we cannot do that. The next you have chance next time, and you can write some blog posts or even participate on conference and present it internally to the team. So it's not only about external presence. There are some other things that are easier to get points for, even for junior developers.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I've just been writing that down about, the merchandise, about making it limited edition merchandise, so that you're right. It's not just about money rewards, and in fact, you don't want people always working towards financial rewards because it sometimes drives the wrong behaviours. It's about that connection and recognition. And if you don't mind, I'm probably going to steal that for my business. I think that could be a really, really good idea to get that level of engagement.
Yeah, I have like a community manager in my team, so that's a person that takes care of like internal and external community around the engineering team. So he organizes some workshops for the developers, how to write, authorship workshops or presentation skills workshops or the outings or things like that. And he also organizes, or the team organizes, the community management team organizes like external meetups, or we have some form of like panel discussions that we do every quarter and things like this. So yeah, I don't know how I got through this topic. Yeah, I have a person for that, so it's not just me.
Yeah.
But as a CTO, you have so many responsibilities that this is something that usually would get put on the lower down the backlog. But that's why I figured I want to have a person in my team who will be taking care of the engagement like proactively and figuring out what can we improve, what we can do better. So yeah, I wanted to make it intentional.
Yeah, well done. I think that's really, really good foresight thinking, because it's so, so important. And so, moving on to the last part of the podcast, where many of our listeners, are always thinking about, many of them want to join scale-up businesses that have gone through that journey that Mews has, and that exciting journey. What would be your one or two bits of advice to someone who wants to join a business like Mews, and how they could really stand out and get that opportunity?
Yeah, like the first thing, what I recommend to especially younger people who are in university or right after university is that's like a period of life when they can afford taking big risks, and joining basically and big risk means possibly big reward. So if you don't have a mortgage, if you don't have a big family to take care of, it's much easier to just try out a couple of startups, see where it goes, basically explore it and be open to some stuff. And over time, you can always, let's say, fall back to scale ups or corporates. That the tech market is so hot that you will always find a job. So what I recommend to younger people is to actually take the risks while they have chance, because later it's much more difficult to take the risks. And generally, I think during the university years, or still in this younger age, I think it's important to try to get broad knowledge, not get too specialized in one area, but to rather get a broader knowledge. I'm a big proponent of the T-shaped personality. So for me, in the younger age, it's good to make the top part of the T letter as wide as possible. And over time, you can be like squeezing it out and making like the leg of the T, making it longer in one area, but definitely making it wider in terms of how many technologies you know, how many programming languages you can write or speak, because the more you know, you absorb the concepts from that, and that helps you in any other language. So basically going into breadth and over time specializing, because when you get to like a job, you need to start specializing. If the company is growing, you will get one area of the product or technology taking care of that. So you will naturally be specializing. And yeah, so that's what I would recommend. Start broad initially, and then only later specialize.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. And you learn so much from those different environments. And I think, speaking to many startups, it's not a lifestyle choice. For a startup, you're throwing your life and soul into it, and so you need to have the energy and the drive. But what you learn off the back of it is transferable skills, isn't it? It's the breadth of experience you get, and can be quite different when you end up working for a large enterprise, where you can be quite a specialist in a very, very small part of a much bigger machine. And so you need to find your place that gives you the energy, but also where you can utilize your skills.
Yeah, and I think that also depends on the personality. So there are people who like to try new things, do lots of projects. So for them, like an agency that delivers solutions or applications for customers might be better. And there are people who like to basically pursue like excellence in one craft and go as deep as possible. And for them, on the other hand, some bigger company is better, because if you have a small startup, and Mews was like that in the early days, there wasn't much time for me to spend doing big research on databases and how to optimize our database, because just we hadn't have time for that. But as we are growing now and we have infrastructure team that goes in depth of the database performance. So if you're interested in one area, the bigger company is, I guess, better for you, because there's more space for specialists. In the early startup days, it's the best for like generalists and people who can, wear 5 different hats, change the hats. I was answering support tickets. I was going to the hotels and, helping them to install printer there, even though it wasn't my job. And yeah, now I'm no longer doing that, because we have specialized for that in the company. So it also depends on internal motivation of the people, of what you like, what type of person you are, and based on it, you can pick, the right fit for you in terms of which company to join or where to work.
Yeah, and again, thank you. It really is that type of world where you can get everything from the generalist all the way to the specialist. And can you believe it? That's our time has flown by. This has been such an interesting conversation, and to hear the growth of Mews and your journey within the business, and your thoughts on not only making employees your customers, but the V shape of learning to really start with a breadth of skills and to bring it in, and to encourage people to take risks when in their early years. All of that really resonates, and thank you to hear it from people like yourself who live and who've walked the walk. It's what many of our listeners love to hear, and it's inspiring to see. So Honza, thank you so much for being on our podcast. I hope you found it enjoyable. Yeah,
it was great. Thanks for inviting me.
And to our listeners, that's another episode of our Future Tech podcast series. So as always, the podcast is posted on our website, arrowsgroup.com/podcast. And it's also on Spotify and our university partners' careers portals. So for now, it's a massive thank you to Honza and to all of our listeners. This is another episode. Thank you.